All right, the final topic that we wanted to touch on, further down the table, Heidenheim take on Wolfsburg. Heidenheim had such a great start to the season, and came out of the gates storming, great run of results. Hasn't been great lately for them, and they're now playing a Wolfsburg side that finds themselves in the relegation zone, so I'm pretty sure that's also not what they expected. It is an interesting game in the regard that both these teams, well, Heidenheim, I think if they finish mid-table, if they finish exactly where they are now, that's fine. I don't think they like the run of results that they have. We don't know how they have done the Conference League. That game, as we record, is not for another hour or so we'll have to see how they're going to do against Hearts. Mind you, they have done quite well in the Conference League, and there maybe lies the problem, Stefan, that it is maybe just a little bit too much football for them.
Yeah, I think that is probably the issue. I thought it was quite interesting that Frank Schmidt actually got quite agitated with the media after their defeat to, I think it was Union Berlin in the Pokal last week. A game in which actually Paul Wanner should have had a very last-minute equaliser count to take the game to extra time, but didn't. So he was obviously quite frustrated in general, but I thought the kind of local journalists who cover Heidenheim were asking questions about whether the squad was big enough to compete on 3 competitions, having just been knocked out of one of them. And Schmidt got really kind of snappy with them. He got very agitated. I think he basically responded at one point saying, "If you don't think my squad's not good enough, that's your problem, not mine." And then it's one of those things where like a manager kind of does react in a press conference, and it's one thing for them to deny it, but the manner in which they do it sometimes gives away. It's a tell, if you will. Yeah. It obviously struck a nerve, and you're absolutely right. I think it is it's a season that was always going to be difficult for Heidenheim because of the players they lost. They lost Besta to Benfica, Dinky obviously moved to Freiburg, and then Kleindienst moved on to Gladbach, and that's basically their front 3. Probably easy, like 60 or 70% of the goals last season. They're trying to obviously rebuild. I was actually checking their stats before this game, and it's actually quite interesting that both fullbacks, Furenbach and Bush, are both actually quite high up the league for crosses and successful crosses. Heidenheim are actually 4th in the Bundesliga for crosses into the box this season, and they're 8th in the league for the amount of XG they've actually picked up so far. So they are creating chances. They're still trying to play the kind of football that they played last year, but it's not really going to work that well because they just don't have the service from the likes of Dinky and Besta. They obviously don't have Kleindienst in the box, who's a remarkable target man. And they're trying to kind of make do with what they do have in the sense of, Paul Wanner's probably the most obvious example of that. But yeah, it's very tricky for them. And I think, having watched that game against Holstein Kiel last weekend, it felt like 2 teams that maybe weren't of Bundesliga quality, to be perfectly honest with you. And maybe it's just because of the stadium or the atmosphere or whatever else, but it felt like 2 teams as I was watching it. I was like, both these teams are really going to struggle. So I don't know. It's like we said, we're recording this before their game against Hearts, and we don't know how that might go, but they've also picked up 2 wins, I think, beforehand anyway, so more than likely that their run in the Conference League will continue. It's just whether that's actually a good thing or not for Heidenheim. But look, hey, their fans will be loving every minute of it, so who are we to tell them to give up on Europe so they can get another mid-table finish?
I think if you have been in charge for a couple of decades, like Frank Schmidt has been in Heidenheim, like even if they get relegated this year, he doesn't really have to fear for his job. The Bundesliga, this Bundesliga season is a success. Being in the Conference League is an incredible achievement for this club, right? I think after this match day, they're going to host Chelsea in the Conference League. And yeah, Chelsea might only show up with the B team, but that's still a big deal, right? And I think in the grand scheme of things, one of the big things that came out of Heidenheim this week was, hey, don't let us get sucked down into this maelstream of negativity. We have to remember who we are as a club, where we stand as a club, the fact that this is a really, really small club, and the fact that we're in this league is a miracle, and B, that we're also playing in Europe against teams like Chelsea is just an outstanding achievement, right? And so let's not let negativity overwhelm us, I think is the message that is coming out of Heidenheim at the moment. And so I think that's something to keep in mind going into this match day against Wolfsburg, and it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to handle it. And I think in all of that is this whole story about Paul Wanner, right? Which we had some Substack readers reach out to us and asked me in particular how I felt. And the big story this week, of course, was that Julian Nagelsmann wanted to call him up for the German national team, for the A team. By several reports, Süddeutsche was the first to come out with this. He declined the invite to play for the A national team. He himself said that he wants to focus on playing for the club first and focus staying with the U21 German national team. So this is not a decision for Austria yet. He wants to play with the U21 national team, and he wants to play the Euros with the U21 national team. Internally, it's also being said that Paul Wanner favors Germany at the moment. I think the one thing that he is a little bit worried about is where is his own personal development going to take him? Is he good enough to actually play for Germany long term? He's 18 right now. I think, and many other people in German football think, he is probably the best talent to emerge for a long time. He could be in the same echelon as a Jamal Musiala and as a Florian Wirtz. He is that talented. Thing is, we don't know. And what if it doesn't quite work out for him and he has played a couple of times for Germany? Then his international career is more or less, that's it, right? There's no more room for him to maybe represent Austria. So he just wants to give himself time, and he also wants to see how Germany plan with him in the same token as also playing Musiala and Wirtz. And I think this is also a conversation that includes Bayern Munich, to be quite honest with you, because Bayern Munich have been openly going and pursuing Florian Wirtz, right, which is also something that doesn't sit really well inside the Wanner camp. They think that Wanner can be just as good as Florian Wirtz, and in fact think that he should be the one that they should really be courting here in coming back to Bayern Munich and take that spot next to Musiala. Personally, I think the Wanner camp is right. He's a player that you developed. He is, although he was born in Austria, he grew up in Munich. He's part of the Bayern Munich Academy, and he, that's the sort of player that I think, and they have done really well with Stanisic and some Pavlovic and some of the other kids that are now emerging. They have done really well integrating these players, and I think he should be absolutely next to form the backbone of this clubs. As you Müllers and Neuers and all these other guys are retiring, you want to have a nice backbone of Bavarian players in your squad. And so I think the Wanner camp is right, but I think that is all a big part of the conversation. And I think another part of this conversation is that Heidenheim haven't been playing that well lately, right? So maybe it's also just an attempt by Heidenheim and Frank Schmidt and the Wanner family just say hey, look, let's cool this down a little bit, because if he now plays for Germany, the attention level will be enormous, right? And I think that is all big factors that play into this. And I think it's all an attempt to just cool things down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably necessary. I must admit, I was a little surprised when I read about Julian Nagelsmann looking to try and call him up to the senior team. I know why they did it, obviously, just try and get him to confirm his nationality, but he's nowhere near good enough to play for Germany. That's the kind of the crust of it right now. He's obviously a young prospect. He's obviously very highly rated at Bayern Munich and Heidenheim, but we're talking about a player here who's scored just 2 goals in 13 games or nine league games so far for Heidenheim. He's not winning games the way that I thought or expected him to do for Heidenheim. We just talked about how they've obviously lost a lot of key players. They're in the middle of a very tricky transition, and I completely understand that. But he started the season off with scoring against St. Pauli. He gets a goal and assist against Augsburg, and we kind of thought, wow, here's this kid. He's hit the ground running. He's going to just rack up so many goals for Heidenheim. And he's had his chances. He even had one chance, I think, against Holstein Kiel that didn't really work out, and he's just not really sticking the ball in the back of the net just yet. And I think, as you said, he's probably sitting there thinking, well, look, I've got so much left to do. I think he even said that actually in a statement. I think he said to Kicker that he's like, look, I just want to get one season in the Bundesliga under my belt before I decide where I'm going with things. And I completely understand that, because he's probably maybe at that point where he's trying to figure out, as horrible as it may sound, am I too good for Austria or am I not quite good enough for Germany? Because as you
Mm-hmm.
said, if he picks Germany and he's a decent Bundesliga player, or even a good Bundesliga player, say a Patrick Schick, if he's that quality, where he's a very, very good player, but probably not a number 9 for Germany. At least 10 years ago, I'm sure Germany probably wouldn't mind a Patrick Schick up front right now. But or even like a Niklas Füllkrug, for example. I know it's not seems like an odd example to make because he has played for Germany, but it's only because of such a depth of talent right now. In the previous generation, Füllkrug wouldn't have got anywhere near that Germany team. But if Füllkrug was Austrian, for example, then he probably would be playing every single game from the start of his career to where he is now, rather than just this kind of late blip for Nagelsmann. So it's completely understandable. He turns 19 in December. He's still got a lot of learning to do, and as you kind of said, this is his first kind of season in the top flight of German football, and he has a lot of learning to do. And it seems a little unfair, really. I know Germany are very proactive with this. Musiala is a perfect example of that, where,
Yeah.
Jogi Löw and everyone at the FA was working almost like a bloody plot of like a James Bond movie or something, the way that they were kind of running around the world trying to convince Musiala to agree to move to Germany. Not move to Germany, but to declare for Germany. So I get that the German FA are very, very proactive when it comes to things like this, but in this instance, I think we just have to relax, chill out, let the guy play his football. If he ends up scoring 15, 20 goals for Heidenheim this season, maybe he moves on loan to a Gladbach or a Werder Bremen next year. He kind of starts building it up, then you can start talking about it. But I think at this point, it's still way too early to say whether he's good enough for Germany. It's probably way too early for him to demand rather that he plays for Germany, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's good for him to say, look, I need to develop. And like, I think too, like for anyone who's starting to panic that he could pick Austria, the matter of fact is he's also declined to play for Austria, and he is currently playing for the DFB. He's currently with the U21 national team. So right now he is a German national team player. He just has decided not to make the ultimate decision yet in his national team future. And look, I think that might actually in the long term serve everyone involved. We've seen a lot of players go through the U21 program and do quite well. And if they weren't good enough to then play for Germany, they ended up playing for Turkey or Greece or one of those other countries that they have the passport for. This has happened. But usually when these players are good enough, they end up playing for Germany. A great example is Jamie Leveling, right? Jamie Leveling could have played for Ghana. He waited, and his patience to wait until he was 24 ultimately paid off, right? He's very much now a part of this Germany setup. And when it comes to players playing in Wanner's position, I mean, I wrote about him this week after the Leipzig game. There's a young German winger playing for Celtic at the moment who's fantastic, and Nico Kuhn, right? There's other players out there who are also making a pretty strong statement right now, and that's maybe also a little bit the difference to the Musiala situation. Germany over the last 2 or 3 years have found more depth, whether that's because more players than we thought would emerge, or also because German clubs have done a better work playing these guys, or you always get the one or two surprise candidates who we thought wouldn't emerge at all. And Nico Kuhn is a good example. Leveling is another example, right? So I think it makes sense then to say, hey, A, we don't need him right now. B, he will be served better by developing for the U21 and then come into this Germany squad as a fully fledged professional. And C, if it doesn't work out, he hasn't hurt his future playing for another national team. I think that is pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just actually checking there, because the player that made that I wanted to draw a comparison to was actually Angelo Stiller, who equally also came through the Bayern youth ranks, eventually left the club, went to Hoffenheim, and he's now getting his his dues in the national team. I was checking to see if he has a second nationality. I don't think he does. I don't know why I thought he had. Anyway, but the point I was going to make was that, if you'd asked him at Hoffenheim what your chance to play for Germany, he probably said, well, I'm not entirely sure if I will. But he's now he's worked his way up the ladder in the Bundesliga, and he's now a national team player. And I think that's something that Wanner will have to do. He's got a lot in front of him. Not only does he have to prove himself in the Bundesliga, but he also has, as you said, there's a lot of players in that position, that number 10 position, or attacking midfield, or inside forward position, that Germany have a lot of talented players in. But it'd be a different situation if he'd scored, 20 goals in his first 9 games for Heidenheim, and he was the one saying, "Hey, Nagelsmann, why are you not picking me?" And that's when the DFB should maybe be saying, ringing the alarm bells and saying, "Look, if we don't pick this kid, he's going to go play for Austria." But it's the other way around. There's no way he's getting called up to the national team anytime soon. And I think he's taking a very responsible, very mature approach to it by saying he knows that he's not Florian Wirtz. He knows that he's not Musiala. He probably thinks maybe if I get my head down and work hard in the Bundesliga for a couple of years, I could be an Angelo Stiller. Maybe he does get a shot at it at Bayern Munich. He does well, but I suspect he'll probably end up at a Bundesliga club like Stiller, and he'll work his way up. And by the time he's 23 or 24, we're like, hey, this guy's actually really good. Whether Germany get the chance to call him up then, or whether that's when he decides to move to Austria, we'll see. But at the end of the day, he'll play for the national team that deserve him, I suppose.
I think his ceiling is enormously high, but we'll see. That's something that will be determined by the end of the season by his parent club, Bayern Munich, and whatever they are planning. But I think it was good that we touched on this Heidenheim situation.